And now I'm very excited to welcome for the first time a man that I followed for a very long time, and Paul Stone from Paul Stone Sports. You follow Paul on Twitter at Paul Stone Sports. Paul, been a fan of yours for a long time. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad to be here with you guys and talking a little college football. A great weekend of college football. I'll tell you, we've talked about since this summer the games of Saturday, October 12th regular. And sorry about that. I'm kind of stumbling on my words, but we've talked about Saturday, October 12th for some time over the summer. And now here we are, and we've got games like Ohio State going to Autzen Stadium to play Oregon, the annual Red River Showdown, Texas and Oklahoma there in Dallas. Just, a ton of great football games this weekend that really have a lot of us excited, including the two of us, I'm sure.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, amazing football game. It took a while to develop this, but now we're here. I think it all feels like it really kicked off with Alabama, Georgia a couple of weeks back. And then obviously you had the massive upsets last week, which just follows the letdown spots and things like that. But before we get into these games, being that you're first time guest on the Odds Breakers, why don't you tell our listeners who may not know you just a little bit about yourself and how you're a big fan of college football?
Well, I grew up and have mostly lived my adult life in the state of Texas, and obviously football is pretty big here in the Lone Star State. I was a sports writer for about 20 years as a younger man, so I covered college football as part of my assignments. I've covered you name it. I've covered the event, so did that for about 20 years in my earlier career. I've always had an interest not only in sports, certainly, but in mathematics. That was my favorite subject in school. So it's kind of a natural blend to take the numbers side of me and the sports side of me and gravitate towards sports betting. Like a lot of guys who are not just now coming into the realm of sports betting, where we've got legalization, I guess now maybe in 35 or so states. When I was younger, there wasn't any sports betting except in the state of Nevada. And a lot of us my age and even younger, we kind of broke our spurs in horse racing. So I had a horse track at Louisiana Downs in Bossier City, Louisiana, about 100 miles from where I grew up. So I spent a lot of time reading the daily racing form. I studied it religiously. If I would have studied medical books or law books like I did the daily racing form, I would have probably made something of myself, but here I am. So kind of that's how I got my start. I won a couple of college football handicapping contests there in Las Vegas, won the 2011 Leroy's College Football Challenge, won the 2013 Golden Nugget Friday Football Showdown. And then, I finished in the top four in quite a few other contests, but as far as major contests, I would say two other top four finishes, with the most recent of those being, unfortunately, way back in 2018. So 6 years ago, I finished third in the Golden Nuggets Ultimate Football Challenge. So I've got a little bit of a reputation maybe as a contest player, and have an entry that's doing pretty well in one of the contests right now, but it's so early I don't even think about it. But I'm a college football specialist. Also bet college basketball. That would be one of my other sports of specialization, along with PGA golf. So those are kind of the three sports that I focus in and kind of what I spend my time on.
Well, that's awesome, man. And don't feel so bad about not becoming a doctor, because, why would you want to get called in during like Ohio State, Michigan or something like that? You don't want to get called in for surgery during that game. You might do a bad job. I mean, that's not fun. I don't that doctor life. It's just not for me. It's not for everyone. I totally understand it and love the fact that you're there. Don't get me wrong, but it's not for everybody. But this is for us, and you do such a wonderful job and has won plenty of contests or placed in plenty of contests. I actually do. Now you said that, I'm in a Survivor college contest, and maybe if I get to it later, I'll ask your opinion on something. Survivor is a very interesting thing, but that's great. And it's funny. You went to school in Austin. I actually checked out. I drove my family to Texas from Arizona here in Chandler in the summer, and I drove by the Longhorn Stadium where they play football there, and we went to Barton Springs, swam in that cold water and all that. Kids jumped off the diving board, which was cool because they're a lot younger than that. The kids there were their teenagers, and they got my little 6-year-old, 8-year-old jumping off the diving board, almost like fun. But I'll tell you, Austin's a prettier city than I remember seeing on TV. It's kind of cool. The capital's a little bit like where I went to school in Madison, Wisconsin. And the stadium was really cool, man. I wish I would have been able to see a game there. I was in late June, but it was a surreal experience going to Texas, checking that out, as well as San Antonio and Houston. So kind of hit the big three, my man.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good part of the state to hit. I love Austin and San Antonio, and I don't know if you were able to go west of there, what's called the Texas Hill Country, but some really interesting country. Even in Austin, if you're on I-35 right there where the stadium is, if you go west, even 10 miles, you start to see the change to the rolling hills and just a rougher looking western, cacti and sodal and that type of stuff. It's just a kind of a terrain change there when you get into the edge of that.
We took that way home. We saw Deep Eddy Distillery there. Also that wine country. I forgot the name of the city there, right west.
There's one.
Austin.
Johnson City has a place called Carter Creek Winery that's real popular. Like to go there. A lot of breweries and wineries and neat restaurants and so forth. But a lot of wineries, like you're pointing out there, when you get west of Austin in that hill country, that's a big winery area for the state of Texas.
Yes, absolutely. And we also hit the ice cream place, Bluebell Ice Cream, where they make it. And it was only $1 for a thing of ice cream, pretty big size. So the family ate for $5. I thought that was pretty awesome. Just doing that. And Johnson City, I think we drove right by that. And there was another Fredericksburg. That's it. Fredericksburg was where we went through, which was really cool. And that's right. We caught the 10 after that, but it was a nice back way and just beautiful country out there in Texas. Then obviously when you get past that, it's all desert. And I'm used to the desert being here in Arizona. It's just like, man, this place is big. 600 miles of nothing till El Paso. So that's kind of really what it was. But here we are. We got some big college football games to talk about. But the SEC is something I really thought took a massive – I'm not sure if you'd say a hit, but a lot of teams lost last week. And then I'm curious what your thoughts are on any one-loss SEC team. Now, Texas, amazingly, is the only undefeated SEC team after 6 weeks of college football, 7 if you count week 0. But which one-loss team would you say, Paul, is in most danger to miss the college football playoffs? Not named Oklahoma, of course, because I think we're down on Oklahoma.
Right. Well, of course, if any of those teams, I know where you're coming from here, but if any of those teams can get through the season with just one loss, they're going to make the playoff. But of the teams that are now at one loss, anticipating what will happen with the remainder of their schedule, I would certainly have to say that team is the University of Missouri. And I mean, I didn't believe in Missouri 7 days ago before they went into College Station, and I don't really believe in them today. They were ranked 9th, I think, in both polls going into the game there at College Station. But they lost a lot of players on defense from the team last year. And I think they really got a bump from beating Ohio State in the bowl game, and certainly not to detract from what Missouri did there. But that was a watered down, diluted, unmotivated Ohio State team. So you kind of have to take some of those bowl results with a grain of salt. Again, no fault of Missouri's. But, you lose 5 players off that defense last year that was such a pivotal part of their success to the NFL draft. 5 defenders drafted, 3 of those in the first 3 rounds. They had a defensive end, Darius Robinson, win in the first round, a cornerback, Ennis Rakestraw Jr., win in the second round, and then a linebacker, Tyron Hopper, win in the third round. So you're losing big-time talent at all 3 levels of the defense, and it's not going to be the same. And we saw that it kind of got exposed a little bit, I think, by Connor Wigman and the Aggies on Saturday. So that would be the one-loss team in the SEC that I think is in the most dire straits of not being a playoff contender.
Yeah, that's a great choice. And I thought they were a little overrated. Here's where I screwed up. I leaned Texas A&M side, but I took the under. And when they kicked that field goal last week, man, I wanted to write Drinkwitz a letter. I think I might even started typing. I mean, here's the not only did you disrespect over unders betters by letting the team score 41, you kicked a field goal to lose it and let it go over the number that I had. I was disappointed. And I'm like, why didn't I just not take the Texas A&M side? I think I ranted and raved about that enough on the last show here. But it's a great choice because they are overrated. The problem is that they got at UMass, home versus Auburn, at Alabama, which is their second loss, but Oklahoma at home, at South Carolina, at Mississippi State, and then Arkansas. It's almost like the schedule is still somewhat too easy for them, even though, will 2 losses get them into the playoffs? For an SEC team, you might have thought so. So I agree with you for sure. My other 1A and 1B, I would say, is probably LSU, because LSU, not only, did they lose to a non-conference team like USC, so that's going to go against them. It's not, you can't like have that excuse like, oh man, I only lost my own number 1 conference in the whole college football. They have some tougher games coming up here, and Ole Miss is this week, and maybe we can touch on that game. But they have A&M coming up as well, and it's a little bit tougher of a road than Missouri, wouldn't you say, for LSU?
Yeah, LSU's schedule. Missouri does have their schedule's kind of nicely teed up. I would say, though, and I agree with you, I mean, that is an easy schedule by SEC standards. And I think Missouri's schedule, even after Texas A&M, now ranks just 96th in strength of schedule. So that shows you, how easy their non-conference was for the most part. But even by SEC standards, they've got an easy road to hoe down the stretch. But I would maintain of those games at Alabama, home against Oklahoma, at South Carolina, at Mississippi State, home in Arkansas, really the only slam dunks at Mississippi State. I could see them losing 4 of those 5 games.
Sure.
And I think they're probably going to lose at least 2, and they very well might lose 3. So, I just don't think that football team is quite at the level that they were when they finished last year. Talking about LSU hosting Ole Miss this week. They go to Arkansas and A&M in consecutive weekends after this week. So those teams are both ascending. They're going to be very tough outs. And then after going on the road to face Arkansas and A&M, then they get to host Alabama. So it doesn't get much easier there than at Florida. And then they play at home against a Vanderbilt team that's now viewed a little bit differently, and then close at home against Oklahoma. So LSU has a very difficult schedule down the stretch, and I just don't know if they have the defense or really the offense, but especially the defense in the back to to be good enough to get out of there with a 10-2 regular season record.
Yeah, parlay them both to miss the playoffs. Maybe that's the play right there. Well, man, we have a lot of college football to talk about, but I always want to bring this up before we get into the games. Overrated and underrated now in college football with respect to the market. So in a lot of cases, it means you might be betting on a team or fading a team this week, or maybe just might not like the line this week. I mean, it turns out whenever I say this, sometimes I have a bet on or against one of them, but sometimes I don't. Sometimes it's like I'm just planning on fading them later because it's just too easy to spot. But I'd like to ask you, is there a team that you want to say that's overrated? And maybe it is Missouri right now in college football.
And, I hate to duplicate my work, but, that's my team is Missouri. I think they're the team that's overrated. Their schedule again ranked 96 by Jeff Sagrin. They trailed, in non-conference, they trailed to Boston College by double digits in the first half. Had to go to overtime at home to beat Vanderbilt. Again, that result looking a little bit better after this past weekend. But I just think people are still giving Missouri a little bit too much love. And that love, it might fade fairly quickly after that performance Saturday in College Station against Texas A&M. This week, however, traveling to UMass, a very odd scheduling dynamic, but playing at UMass, an independent that is one of the bottom 10 teams in all of the FBS, but has been playing better the last couple of weeks. So it's interesting that line, Missouri currently favored by about 27.5 points. And Missouri, especially with the talent edge that they have at receiver with Luther Burden and Theo Weiss and some of those guys, UMass might have some trouble covering those guys, and they very well might win by 30 or more. So maybe we'll get another week or two of being able to fade the Tigers. But I'm just not, again, a guy who's bullish on Missouri. I think this is a go against team, at least for the time being, until the market catches up.
Makes total sense to me. I agree with that 100%. And I'll go with BYU. And they were underrated most of the season, right? They're underrated, but I think now it's flipped a little bit. I think they're getting a little bit too much love. In the AP top 25, they're a top 15 team now. I had them against Kansas State, and I had them outright, but it took a lot. It took really Kansas State to puke all over themselves in that game in like a 6-minute time frame, too, for that score to flip so much. Kansas State was playing against themselves. And BYU, all they had to do was hang out. Now, I do wish that I got BYU -3 this week. Don't get me wrong. But now that it's getting up to 5 and maybe touch the 6, I might look the other way with Arizona here. But I would say BYU is probably the one that I would go with if I had to make a choice. Underrated. What is there anybody kind of underrated here that's kind of maybe next week you'll see, wow, we should have been on this team the last couple weeks or something like that. Is there anyone that you can think of that might have some value coming up?
Yeah, I mean, not that the market's low on them. It's not like this team is grossly underrated. But I think Iowa State is the best team in a very balanced Big 12, the Big 12 that you were just talking about. And it's, just part of the very nature of being in a balanced league. You're going to see a lot of single-digit lines, point spreads in this league. So this week's, for instance, you have 5 Big 12 games. The largest spread among those 5 games is 6 points. You've got 2 that are 3, 1 is 4, and another 5. So the average spread for the 5 games, just 4.2 points. So if Iowa State is a point or a point and a half undervalued, then that might not seem too significant to the untrained eye. But when you're talking about all these tight point spreads in a very balanced league, then that does make a difference. And I just think Iowa State, they're a balanced team. They're very, very experienced on both sides of the ball. Their quarterback, Rocco Becht, is getting better with each passing game. So I think this is a team, looking at their remaining schedule, they play at West Virginia this weekend, currently a 3-point favorite. Then they host Central Florida and Texas Tech. They go to Kansas. They host Cincinnati, at Utah, and they host Kansas State. So they're going to be a single-digit favorite in probably 4 of those remaining 7 games, and right around a 10-point favorite, not even 13 in the other 3. So they're going to have some tightly lined games. I think there's some value still with Iowa State in the Big 12.
All right, Iowa State. Yeah, I don't disagree with that at all. They seem really balanced on both offense and defense, and that's something that you don't see a lot of in the Big 12. Mostly bad defenses. The only ones that you assume are good is Kansas State, Utah, and all of a sudden, Utah's got those quarterback issues, and you're never going to get a correct answer from Whittingham. And I can rant for about a half an hour about all that stuff. But I think that's a really good choice here. As far as being underrated team, because I still think they're not getting the respect they should be necessarily in the market. So I thought that interesting. I'll go with A&M. I think with the quarterback now, it's not Weigman. I think they're kind of running hot, and I think they're going to upset some teams coming up here. I thought it was smart to make the switch, and I see Texas A&M. They have a tough schedule. Do not get me wrong. They got to go play LSU coming up. They got at Auburn, and they got number 1 Texas. But this could be a very dangerous spot for Texas at the end, especially if Texas is still undefeated here, kind of coming into the end of the season here. They really played with Missouri, and don't get me wrong, Missouri was overrated, but are they 41-7 overrated? It's a point where I just like what I saw from Marcel Reed, and they have a running game now. I think he's not making mistakes that Connor Weigman does. So I'll go with them, if that's fair. Let's move on to some college football then. And we have some huge games this week. It's just going to be a viewing pleasure on Saturday, because back to back to back, you have some amazing games. Obviously Oregon, Ohio State, you got Oklahoma, Texas. But let's start out. I'll start out with a game that I picked: Memphis versus USF, South Florida, and it's plus 7.5. The total of this game is 60.5. So I got a little bit better of a number on this, but I'm not going necessarily with a side. I'm going with a total here. And Memphis has a very good offense. Their defense has actually been a little bit better this year, but they still have some issues against the run. What I will say is South Florida, it has been able to put up some points, and you saw that against teams like Alabama and a few others. And the thing about South Florida that I'm looking at is their speed of play. I think that South Florida loses fast when they can, and they win fast if they're playing some fraudulent teams out there. But in this case, I just see a lot of possessions with these teams. And I know the total's kind of high, especially since the switch, but South Florida is one of the fastest playing teams in the nation right now. And I believe they rank third or fourth in seconds per play. I just got to pull up the stat. I think that their schedule being so hard, ranking 22nd, doesn't really show their true offensive power yet. They had a brutal start to the season, but their defense isn't all that great. They can be thrown on, and Memphis should be able to throw the ball. So I went over 59.5. I like it over 60.5 still to this day. Paul, any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you're looking at playing overs in college football specifically, I mean, one of the main things you have to focus on is pace of play. How many plays are you going to get in the game? And, the average game right now totals about 135 plays. And these are two teams that throw the ball, a fairly good percentage of the time and also play at a fast tempo. So I think this is a game that could be closer to 150 plays or so. And we saw, Memphis can score, no question about it. They've got a guy from my state here, Seth Hennigan. He's a coach's son. He's their quarterback. His dad is a high school football coach in the Dallas-Fort Worth area and a veteran quarterback, good receivers. They're an offensive-minded football team, and certainly South Florida, especially if their main quarterback, Byron Brown, is healthy. He's a big-time dual threat guy, and they are definitely with Alex Golish as their head coach. They have definitely been offensive-oriented as well. So, yeah, this game definitely kind of screams points at you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Memphis's pace would even show higher than their 69, 70th rank if they had a harder schedule that they played. I think they just had to slow down some of those games a little bit at the end in those situations. But I see over. I see a lot of points. This is a pretty big game for these teams trying to make it to the title game, obviously, for the AAC. So glad we have some agreement on that one. Let's go to a game that you liked. Miami, Ohio versus Eastern Michigan. In Eastern Michigan, plus 2.5. Home dog total is 46. What do you got for us in this game?
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about all the big games this weekend, and here I am talking about Mid-American Conference game where the favorites 1-4, which is Miami of Ohio. But that's really what's interesting about this game is the fact that you've got a 1-4 team in Miami of Ohio on the road, favored over a 4-1 team in Eastern Michigan. And obviously schools play disparate schedules in the non-conference, and that is certainly the case here. You look at those schedules. Miami's schedule currently ranked the 34th most difficult by Jeff Sagrin. So Miami 34th, Eastern Michigan only 163rd. So Miami's played a lot of toughies. They played Northwestern, Cincinnati, Notre Dame, and then last week lost to Toledo. Eastern Michigan, not so much. So I like this Miami team with a veteran quarterback in Brett Gabbert, a hungry Miami team that is got to be thirsty for a victory, giving less than a field goal. So I like the Red Hawks minus 2.5 over Eastern Michigan.
Are you at all concerned with Chris Creighton's record as a dog?
Yeah, he has been good as a dog, no question about it. So, you have to look at those things. I think there's it's not the end all be all how coaches perform in certain point spread roles, but it certainly has to be given some consideration. But I just give a little more weight to the fact that Miami's, they've been punching up in class. They've been going up against some some big hitters that have better players, that have greater resources,
Yeah.
that have deeper rosters, and so forth and so on. So I think it's a hungry team too. They hadn't tasted victory for some time. Only one victory over UMass this season. So I think they're going to get the victory there.
Yeah, it's funny. Both teams played UMass, but that's like literally the only easy game for Miami, Ohio. Miami, Ohio is supposed to be a big contender here, but you still don't know this because of their schedule. They haven't got really into the MAC much yet, minus that Toledo game, and Toledo's a better team than we expected this year, than I expected anyway. But Cincinnati's shown to be very good this year. Northwestern, a Big Ten team. It was the first game of the season. Eastern Michigan, Massachusetts, Jacksonville State, St. Francis at Kent State. Kent State might be worse than St. Francis, actually, believe it or not. So, yeah, I mean, the only team they played was at Washington, where they lost by double digits. So I totally see what you're saying here. The fact that it's such a small spread, if it gets 3, it's like hard to count that as a dog. Now, I know the stats do, but you wonder where this is going to close. Maybe it goes down to 1. At this number, you probably got to start looking the other way towards Miami. So I do agree with you on many of those points. What about this game? Kansas State versus Colorado. Colorado is +4. Total is 56.5. You were mentioning the Big 12 here. We talked a little bit about Kansas State and how they choked out at BYU. I am very excited to hear your angle on this one, Paul. 56.5 total. Colorado kind of, believe it or not, riding under the radar for once. What do you have for us?
Yeah, first of all, it's a small sample size, but Kansas State, in their last 5 games when cast as a road favorite, they have failed to cover all 5 times, and that includes 3 outright losses, one of those being the 38-9 defeat at BYU back on September 21st that we talked about. And meanwhile, Colorado and their polarizing head coach Deion Sanders, they have thrived as an underdog in Sanders' year and a half there in Boulder. The Buffaloes 7-3 against the spread as an underdog, including 3-0 last year against the spread as a home underdog. This is the first time this year they have been a home underdog, but 3-0 last year against the spread as a home dog. And I like a fundamental advantage here. Colorado passes the ball, and they pass it pretty well. They pass the ball 62% of their offensive plays. They have one of the nation's top receiving core. I mean, it's a top 5 level receiving core. Travis Hunter, the two-way standout, of course, the main guy, 46 catches already, 561 yards, 6 touchdowns. Guy's on pace to have a 1,000-yard receiving season, even though he plays basically every play on defense as well. So just an incredible talent. But they've got multiple. They got 4 receivers that you got to cover. Kansas State, they're not very good defending the pass. They're 89th nationally this year in yards allowed per pass attempt. It's 7.9 yards per attempt. So it's just a fundamental advantage there. Colorado's been good as a dog. Kansas State, not that good on the road. I'm still not sure exactly how Avery Johnson is handling the ball, decision-making, especially away from the friendly confines of the Little Apple. So I look for Shedeur Sanders and company to throw the ball on Kansas State. I like the fact I'm getting points here. Colorado +4 over Kansas State.
This is such a fascinating game, and I'm glad you picked it because it's almost like the contrarian plays now. Colorado, everyone's like, Kansas State should run the ball down their throat. Well, Kansas State's been making some big mistakes in some bad situations, and their defense isn't quite as good as I thought it was coming in here. And the way they just beat up UCF, and I know UCF has their own problems, but Colorado has kind of matured a little bit, and it's interesting to see how their run defense has improved. Paul, I thought that Colorado. It got a lot better on the defensive side. Maybe the most improved side of the ball for a lot of teams this year was Colorado. So they're a serious contender now, and they get Kansas State at home. They're going to feel disrespected. I'm not going to lie, my number is 4. So I wish I kind of got it at 5.5. But if I was going to make a play on this right now, I would definitely make the play at 4, and I'm still going to consider it going on throughout the rest of the week. and I'll handicap that a little bit more. But Shedeur Sanders also getting a little bit more protection. Minnesota versus UCLA. UCLA +5, total is 40. So I have to play this, and sometimes you just gotta hold your nose, man. But I think last week's Minnesota versus USC game set up well for both USC this week, and it also set up pretty well for UCLA. I mean, UCLA did get beat by Penn State, and they got beat by enough, but I did see a little bit in them, some competitiveness, and maybe Foster's not a good coach. He's probably not going to be a good coach, but that doesn't mean he's not a good motivator, and these kids have to step up at some point for their own dignity. UCLA at least has #1 schedule in the league, according to Sager. They have the #1 hardest schedule. They played 4 ranked teams out of the 5 teams that they played. Minnesota's toughest game was last week versus USC, where they were outgained in some yards. And if you look at some advanced box score analysis, USC should have won. Some griping about the officiating in that game. I heard, I didn't watch the game, but it doesn't surprise me from last week. UCLA ranks 120th in yards per play, but the Gophers only rank 98th themselves. It's not like this team going on the road after 2 massive emotional weeks should be laying over a field goal here. I think Justin Martin did okay, and I kind of would prefer him over Garbers at this point. 22 for 30, 1 touchdown last week, 0 interceptions. If he takes care of the ball, he might be the starting quarterback for UCLA over Garbers. I'm playing UCLA here, and I played him +5.5, and I played him outright too. I think the Bruins keep it at least close, possibly win this game out, put the bigger on the spread. But I like UCLA, one of my favorite plays of the week.
Yeah, one thing that sets up nicely for UCLA, obviously it's been a pretty tough year for first-year head coach Deshaun Foster and the Bruins to this point, but they are decent at stopping the run. You know that they've been pretty good against the run to this point. Minnesota, a run-heavy team. You would expect them to be even more run-heavy playing on the road at the Rose Bowl. So I think too, you look at these types of things, you don't like to think of yourself as a team that, hey, we're not going to win a whole lot of games in conference. But I think UCLA has to know when they look at that schedule, there's not a whole lot of opportunities probably for Big Ten victories this year. And I'm not looking at their schedule right now, but this might be one of their very best opportunities. I can say that with great certainty. So I would think they would really be ultra focused and all hands on deck facing Minnesota this week.
Great call on the running, because they only allow 3.8 yards per rush, or 3.4 yards per rush, which ranks 38th in the nation. And when they played a schedule that's #1, that has to be something seriously looked at. The more I look at this play, the more I like it, Paul. And I might have to even add to it from here on, my man. Let's go to Washington versus Iowa, and Iowa's laying 2.5. The total 41.5. This is one that you picked. What do you have for us on this Big Ten matchup?
Well, I'll tell you, especially this time of the year, I like to look at teams that kind of had different experiences in their previous game, and these teams certainly did. You look on one hand, you have a visiting Washington team coming to Iowa City this weekend, but last weekend they played Michigan in that rematch of the national championship game, 27-17, and they took that rematch pretty seriously. I don't know if the college football world outside of Seattle did take it as seriously as they did, but when they won that game, there was a sea of purple flooding the field there at Husky Stadium. They came out of the stands, field storming situation, so they were emotional. It was a big game, and now they have to go to Iowa City. Not only do they have to go to Iowa City, but Washington now playing for the 7th straight week out of the gate. So they're playing for the 7th straight week. They started practicing back in early August, so they've really had no interruption, no time to catch their breath. And I think this is the time of the year you can find several teams in the same situation this weekend, with Washington being one of those. So they're going to Iowa City. They're playing an Iowa team that trailed Ohio State in Columbus this past weekend, only 7-0 at the half. Then the Buckeyes flexed their muscle, ran Iowa out of the gym, beat them 35-7 there in Columbus. Lopsided game. Iowa quarterback Cade McNamara turned the ball over 3 times. He lost 2 fumbles, threw 1 interception. So he's coming off a poor game. But I kind of like that. I like the fact that Iowa's kind of bruised, beaten, and battered. Their quarterbacks, people kind of down on him because he didn't play well. And Cade McNamara is not going to contend for the Heisman Trophy or anything like that. But I think he's going to up his game a little bit. I think Iowa might get overlooked a little bit by Washington. Again, this is a Washington team playing for 7 straight weeks. Also, looking at the fundamental component of Iowa's run game against Washington's run defense. Washington pretty good on run defense, but they did go to East Piscataway a couple of weeks ago, outgained Rutgers by about 250 yards, still lost the game by 3 points. But in that game, Rutgers running back Cal Monangai, he rushed for 132 yards on 25 carries. Rutgers rushed for 184 yards against Washington, 5.6 yards per carry. I think Iowa's running game with Caleb Johnson is even a little bit better. Caleb Johnson for Iowa has been outstanding to this point, 771 yards rushing through 5 games, averages 7.9 yards per carry. So I think Iowa's going to be able to run the ball a little bit. Iowa minus 2.5. You got to think if they win the game, they probably get the money. So I like the Hawkeyes minus 2.5 over the Huskies.
No disagreement here. I am a little careful with Iowa, and I usually lay the money line. I found a minus 130, but I had to up the size because of it, but I did. It's the terrible spot for Washington. They got their revenge. I mean, is it really revenge? I don't know, but whatever. They beat the team that beat them in the national title game, and it does affect the kids that transfer in because they kind of take on what the school's going through, and that was my handicap on Washington last week when I laid 2 points or 1 point. It was 1 point actually I laid with them last week. That was my same handicap, but now it's going to work in the opposite. And here's the thing. Iowa's defense is better than Michigan's, and Iowa's defense is playing at home. But the truth is that Iowa's offense is actually a little bit better than it has been in the past. They have a better offense coordinator now, the old coach from Western Michigan. His name left my head. But they're playing some decent football. And, yeah, they got beat by Ohio State. Who doesn't get beat by Ohio State? That's fine. It's in Ohio State. I mean, that's just a tough environment, man. And I was on Ohio State last week. But, this is a spot situation where you got to take Iowa here, still poised to win through the Big Ten. Washington's still a little young. I do like Jedd Fisch. I do believe that Washington is going to be a play-on team. I just don't think it's right now. So at the 2.5 or the money line, Paul, I made the play. I completely agree with you on this one. So it's a great one. Let's hopefully catch that this week. Let's move on to the Red River rivalry. And you've been to 30 of these games. You mentioned Oklahoma versus Texas at Cotton Bowl. I wrote down Texas minus 14.5. I don't even know if that's fair anymore. Is that now 14 here? What's the fair number for me to say on this one?
I don't know if you're asking me, but I did see a lot of universal 14.
Yeah, because I don't want to say the wrong thing, so I'm going to pull it up right now on my odds board. It's still pretty split. There's a lot of juice, 14.5s. I mean the big ones like the FanDuels and the DraftKings have 14 on DraftKings, 14.5 minus 115. I'm going to call it 14.5. minus 115. This is your territory, Paul. So I'm going to have you start on this one and see if we align. But I'm actually kind of thinking a little bit on both sides in one way. But let's hear what you have to say about such a large spread and such a big rivalry.
I'm really torn on this game. I'm not going to make a bet, I don't think. If I make a bet, it'll probably be on the total, on the under. But you look at these two teams from a fundamental standpoint, assessing, one team's offense against the other team's defense and vice versa. And Texas would appear to have a substantial edge on both sides of the ball. I think Auburn, did they have over 500 yards against Oklahoma, or did I dream that up? I think they had a lot of yardage against Oklahoma.
They had 450 at least. I remember looking at that box score, Paul.
Yeah, so they put up a lot of yardage against Oklahoma. And, Auburn's offense is nowhere, near what Texas's offense is. Texas has 3 big-time wide receivers with Matthew Golden, who came up from the University of Houston, Silas Bolden from Oregon State, Isaiah Bond from Alabama. They found a new tight end in Gunnar Helm, who's been with the program now for 4 or 5 years. So they've just got all kinds of receiving options there at Texas. They have Quinn Ewers, who's coming back. If Ewers can't go, Arch Manning's done a tremendous job. So Texas's offense just, I think it's 482 is what they had. Auburn had 482 against Oklahoma. So you got to think, all things being equal, if Auburn had 482, you got to question yourself, what's Texas going to gain against this Oklahoma defense, which is possibly better. Oklahoma's had to make the decision, I think, to go from their 5-star recruit quarterback Jackson Arnold to Michael Hawkins Jr. Michael Hawkins, a runner more than a passer at this point. His passing skills not refined. Texas freshman defensive end Colin Simmons starting to show why he was one of the top defensive recruits in the nation. This guy's going to be a Thursday night draft pick. Colin Simmons, if you don't hear any other name that I say, watch him on Saturday. He is a pass rushing. He is a guy from the edge. He's getting used to it. He's getting more plays. He's a big time player. He's already Texas's. He'll be their best defensive player at the end of the year. He might already be their best defensive player. So he's going to wreak havoc on them. So you look at all that and you just think Texas is going to blow them out. But then you think of the rivalry component of the game. These games tend to do funny things. I covered the game back in 1996. If you were watching college football back then, John Blake, the late John Blake, unfortunately, it was his first year at Oklahoma, only coached a couple of years there. But Oklahoma started 1996 0-4. They lost their first 4 games. They come into this game against number 25 Texas, not as good as the Longhorns are this year, but they're 20.5-point underdogs. Is Oklahoma. The final, the Sooners 30, the Longhorns 27. So funny things can happen sometimes in this game. I just see such a talent disparity, and I'm just kind of torn. One side of me, the analytical side, said Texas is going to blow them out, and then kind of the other side of me, just kind of the gut feeling. You think Oklahoma can keep it close, and Texas was not sharp against Mississippi State a couple of weeks ago. They had an off game. It was competitive for a half, but I don't think Texas had much focus. I don't think they really were zoned in. They're going to be zoned in for the Sooners. They're going to bring their full, what I like to call collective team psyche. So a lot of talking, but not really a pick. I think it might be, even though it's been historically recently high scoring, I think it might be a little bit lower scoring of a game. I think Oklahoma certainly needs that to have a chance to win.
Yeah, they do. Mississippi State's such a weird situation too, coming into that, how Georgia's been looking and all the trouble they're in. I do have a question about that later, but so I took 14.5, but I took it in the point where I thought it was going to come down, and it is coming down because I'm going to have some options I'm hoping for when it gets like maybe 13. The truth is positive EV can be between the 14s. It can be 14.5 to 13.5. It can. You can play both sides for positive EV. Being that, it lands that a lot, and the numbers say so. Now, I'd be hoping for a 13 or something like that, but we have a lot of time to make a complete decision. The thing that really bugs me, and you mentioned everything, statistically, yeah, I think statistically I have Texas minus 18 if I look at my metrics and my algorithm and things like that. But it's a situation where both teams coming off the bye, Oklahoma has more room for improvement. They still have some really good recruits. I know they're kind of banged up on their receivers. Texas has the better team. Quinn Ewers has been a guy that's in a weird situation. I feel like half or more of the fans want Manning to start. It almost feels like a weird situation. And when I think of Quinn Ewers kind of just choking some games away like last year, he's choked games away his whole career, really. Is this a stinker lining up for him? And that Oklahoma's going to be really fired up. On the other side of things, if they did start Arch Manning, which they're not, but he's too young almost to go into a rivalry with 14 points laying on the ground here. I almost feel like he's not quite experienced enough. He made a few mistakes when he came in. So I'm kind of torn too. I grabbed 14.5. I'm not sure if it's going to stay aside because I can always make a change here. But I just feel like we might feel like complete idiots, Paul, if this is a 3-point game at the end of the day. Is that fair?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think from a numerical value, you just see it head north of that 14 mark. And I think that puts the buy sign on when you're kind of a value guy, on the Sooners. You just see that 14.5 and you just take it and kind of count your options later like you are. And 14.5 is just a little bit too much. And you can't really make it part of your handicap. But Quinn Ewers has been injury prone, not only his entire college career, but dating back to his high school career at South Lake Carroll, there outside of Dallas. He missed a considerable portion of his junior year, if I'm not mistaken, in high school. So he's been injury prone. So Quinn Ewers is going to start on Saturday. But does he re-injure himself? Just because he starts doesn't mean he finishes. And there is some drop off right now, all things being equal. Not that he's not capable of having a better individual game than Quinn Ewers, but Arch Manning's made some freshman looking decisions. And, if he turns the ball over, if he gets in the game, turn the ball over one time, that could be very critical in the final score outcome. So, 14.5, I think most of the pros are going to jump on that 14.5. And I bet you Friday, as we record here today, it's Wednesday, October 9th. But by Friday, I bet you that 14 is going to disappear. I just got to think that the pros are going to come in heavy and certainly take the 14.5. I think the best you'll be able to find, I should probably say, is 14 and might even get below that.
And Jackson Arnold, has not really impressed yet. I wonder if this is his last, Michael Hawkins comes in later Oklahoma just trying for whatever. But you have to remember that Oklahoma, they should not have won that against Auburn. It was their defense that won that game. I actually lost a ticket on Auburn, so I'm still bitter about that one too. And I feel like I remember the losers a lot more than I do the winners, Paul. But Texas played nobody. And you can say the Michigan win, but Michigan is not a good team this year. They're a top 30 team this year. That's where I think they're going to finish. I'm not even sure if it's in the top 20 or 25 at the end of the day for Michigan. So, I mean, earlier it looked a lot better, but now it doesn't look so great. I think the whole Mississippi State thing is a little head scratching. So I'm going to stick with my 14.5 for now, but I reserve the right to buy back a little bit at least, maybe for half if that thing moves in my direction. So real quick, we got Ohio State going to Oregon, and this opened up back at 4.5 on Sunday, and I thought about it. I didn't take it. I think it's back down to about 3 now. I mean, that's the number I have is 3. There's not a lot for me to say except that when one game that Oregon should have lived up as their 17-point favorite, they didn't. They got lucky in 2 special teams touchdowns, beat a really good Boise State team. But when Ohio State spreads start getting under 20, they blow out Iowa. They're beating up defenses here. Now it's a tough environment because they're going to Oregon. And to be honest with you, I remember when Oregon beat Ohio State a few years ago, kind of surprised them at the beginning of I think that was with Kiev Thibodeau playing for Oregon. But one thing I did notice is Oregon this year, when they decided to show their talent against Oregon State, and I lost a bet, I was on Oregon State plus like 17 or something. They really showed that there's some NFL players in this game. They literally threw them around like rag dolls, and that's kind of when I noticed with Ohio State. It's all about Dylan Gabriel and Sam Howard here. I think it's a solid spread. I think maybe pushing 3.5. I have Ohio State, my top power rated team. Anything real quick on this one?
Well, I agree with you on Ohio State. I mean, even though they hadn't played a difficult schedule either, just looking at their lineup, the guys who opted to return rather than go into the NFL draft, this is one of those teams you look at and you say, man, they got a top 3 or 4 offense and they got a top 3 or 4 defense. Ohio State is the real deal. You give me one team to win it all, and I don't even blink. Ohio State's that team. It all comes down to quarterback play. I think, Will Howard, the quarterback for Ohio State, first-year quarterback of the Buckeyes who transferred from Kansas State. He had some interception trouble during his history there for the Wildcats at Kansas State. Oregon knows that. I think Oregon's going to bring some pressure. I think they're going to try to confuse him. I think they're going to try to force Will Howard to make some decisions and make some quick decisions. And I think that's going to be, they might give up a big play or two, but I think that's going to be what they're going to view kind of as their route to potential victory. I love Ohio State, but when I saw it at the opener, I was able to get 4 with Oregon, just kind of a medium cheese pizza bet. I didn't go overboard, but 4 at Alton Stadium, a big game. I took Oregon +4, just again because it was the full 4 points at Alton Stadium, and took them, even though I really believe in this Ohio State team. But Dylan Gabriel, the Oregon quarterback, last year at Oklahoma, I think he played better than he has to this point at Oregon. The game that he played last year, the second Saturday in October against Texas, leading Oklahoma to a come from behind victory in the final minutes. If he plays against Ohio State on Saturday, this second Saturday in October, like he played on the second Saturday in October last year against Texas for Oklahoma, then Oregon has a real chance. So going to be a great game, going to be an electric atmosphere, and I took the home dog +4.
It also felt like they beat Michigan State by more than the final score was, 31-10. Michigan State covered, I think it was 23, 24 points. So it was really on the brink. But they kind of let off the gas a little bit on that. I've seen the upside with them, but I also see a lot of upside with Ohio State. So, Dylan Gabriel has his choking moments, which we saw with Oklahoma. Even saw that a little bit when he played at UCF years ago. So I'm not going to say Sam Howard hasn't, though. So Howard, probably a little bit more of the poised quarterback. I think the upside goes with Dylan Gabriel, but this is going to be just a wonderful night game, man, to cross the T's, dot the I's on our big Saturday. Before we go, I'd like to talk about a segment called Beer Bet Bangers. Now, I know you might not have one. And I actually struggled to find one because you can't just bet Heisman, all these things multiple times, or else you're just going to be in a lot of trouble when Jalen Milroe wins, or when maybe Genty does win. I don't think he does. He's a favorite this week, which is crazy. But that's why they don't have the Doak Walker Award up there, by the way. But I decided to go something a little bit different. And it's only +200, but I put some beer money on James Madison to win the East Division in +200. And it's up there right now, DraftKings at +200. Just because they lost to Louisiana Monroe away, all of a sudden they're like, not a favorite in such an easy conference. I mean, Marshall's the only one that kind of scares me, and I got James Madison as a pretty substantial favorite over Marshall, Coastal Carolina. They're actually 9.5-point favorites at Coastal, and they have Coastal up top at the sunbeltsports.org thing. And James Madison's 9.5-point favorite on Friday here. Or it might even be Thursday. It's Thursday. I think it's Thursday tomorrow. So it's like, why would you not take them at +200 to win the East Division on DraftKings right now? It makes no sense to me. So I put some beer money on that, Paul.
Yeah, I don't have any beer money bets. Since I've kind of been fighting the bug, so I'm saving my beer money to get to the craft beer bar here. Probably not this weekend. I was shooting for this weekend, but I might have to wait a few more days. But Sunbelt's an interesting conference, a wide open conference. The difficulty with some of these Group of 5 conferences like the Sun Belt and Conference USA, MAC, and so forth, the era of NILs made handicapping these conferences, in my opinion, even more difficult because they lose their best players. That's what's happened to Miami of Ohio. I mean, they lost their top running back. They lost their top defensive end. I mean, they get poached. And so it's kind of hard to assess where these teams are. But, I'll be rooting for you there, and hopefully you'll make some beer money and maybe invite me over to have one of the beers.
Absolutely. As soon as you're in Arizona, we'll definitely get some craft beers too. I'm a big fan of craft beers, but I'm also a big fan of Paul Stone Sports. Thank you so much for coming on this show and breaking down some great plays. Iowa -2.5, Miami, Ohio -2.5, Colorado +4. Where can our listeners get your great information and your plays for the upcoming weeks?
Well, first of all, if they're on X, formerly known as Twitter, I appreciate it if they consider giving me a follow at Paul Stone Sports. And then I also have a website where they can see all of the products that I offer, paulstonesports.org.
There it is, paulstonesports.org. Make sure you check out Paul. He's on VSiN. He's all the great shows. He's one of the best out there. Make sure you get his information and follow him on Twitter